Welcome to Wealth Curve Talk, hosted by John L. Smallwood, a certified financial planner and president of Smallwood Wealth Management. With over 30 years experience helping people with wealth management strategies, financial planning, business ownership, estate planning, insurance, and more, John shares insight with you that you can use to gain financial confidence and peace of mind. And now, here's your host, best-selling author and 6-time 5-star Wealth Manager Award winner, John L. Smallwood.
Hello, it's John Smallwood from Smallwood Wealth Management, located in Red Bank, New Jersey. Today we're on the podcast Wealth Curve Talk, and I wanted to share some insights of what's going on. There's a lot of headlines constantly about inflation, the impact of inflation, how inflation is going to impact us, whether inflation exists or it does not exist. And it's an interesting conversation. And it's really important to everybody when you're building a wealth plan, you're building a financial plan, you're building a financial strategy to understand the impacts of inflation. And a solution to overcoming inflation is not isolated to one-off investment decision, but more importantly, it is a macro plan of multiple tools coming together at different times under different economic conditions in different places to provide that safety in the inflationary conversation, because inflation is here. It has always been here. It will always be here. It is part of the natural law of wealth and the erosion of wealth, because inflation is an erosion tool. It takes away purchasing power. It makes money less valuable as you move forward. As we're on this podcast today, before we get started, I want to make sure that you have a couple pieces of information that's available to you. First of all, everything that's on the podcast is general and that it's going to apply to your personal situation. But the question is, how does it apply to your personal situation, which is almost impossible for anybody to really realize that, because you're unique, your plan is unique, you're different than everybody else, and the impacts of inflation are going to be different on you. Because if you really think about inflation, the government gives us a couple different numbers. It says inflation is 2.2% or 1.1% or whatever that number is. And based on that, the government has to do certain things, such as increase Social Security or do other things. So you have to think about what's in the inflation calculation, what's not in the inflation calculation, what's being removed and added and replaced, and what impact does that have on the true number. I argue that inflation is relative to the individual, and that everybody that's listening to this podcast, everybody that's in the world, has their own unique inflation rate based upon where they live, what part of the country they live in, if we're talking about just the United States, how old they are, what they buy, the types of items they buy, their preferences, the frequency in which they buy them, the size and the quantity in which they buy them is going to impact the inflation rate. If you're, and this is a small minutia here, but if you're shopping weekly and buying one roll of toilet paper, as opposed to going to the large box store and buying 18 months of toilet paper, you might be subject to more inflation one way or the other, depending upon the day that you bought that. If prices are constantly rising, then buying the 18-month supply was a better way to protect from inflation. But what I want to do in this is not talk about the minutia, but talk about how important this is, right? At our website, as we go forward, Smallwood Wealth Management, all the podcasts that we've done are there. You can subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting streaming service. I'd love to get ideas and concepts for from you as to things that you want to hear, when you want to hear them. We also, on the website, offer the ability to schedule what we call a wealth curve conversation. That is a free, no obligation conversation, 30 to 40 minutes with one of our advisors to really dig in and understand what is important to your plan, where is the financial pressure, as we like to call it, and what kind of strategies and solutions can you begin to put into play that are going to help offset that financial pressure. Financial pressure comes from taxes and inflation, planned obsolescence, technological change, and a myriad of other stuff, right? I mean, it's just crazy. But you have to think about this, right? Is if I am retired today, or I'm here, right? I'm working, I'm not retired, I'm growing a family, whatever it is. If I earn $100,000 in today's environment and inflation is 3% over a 10-year period, my $100,000 will only buy, right? If you think about it, so you got 3%, you have $100,000 starting value, think about that, and inflation is 3%, right? So what's happening is over time, as we go forward, slowly that purchasing power is being undermined, right? So 10 years from now, $100,000 only buys $73,000, $742 worth of goods if inflation is 3%. Over a 5-year time frame, you're talking about $15,000 purchasing power taken, or $100,000 only buys $85,873. Now, if you're working in an environment where your income is staying level and flat, and inflation is 3 or 4% around you, you're feeling that pressure because you're having trouble getting out of the grocery store. You're having trouble, getting as much items as you were before. Now, if your income is going up at a great rate, your potential, you don't feel the effects of inflation. It's when you get onto some sort of fixed income environment where your income's not changing, but everything around you is changing as far as the pricing, and it costs more to go forward to buy new things, you're feeling the impact of inflation, okay? So what I wanted to just kind of discuss for a second is when you look at inflation, and there's a download that I have available that I pulled some JP Morgan asset management charts. They have the guide to markets, they have the guide to retirement. I've taken a couple of slides from there for the conversation of this, for what we're talking about. So there's a couple different things, right? So you have core CPI. Core inflation is defined as CPI excluding food and energy prices. So core CPI excludes food and energy prices. But that's what we buy, don't we? The PCE, the Personal Consumption Expenditure Deflator, employs an evolving chain-weighted basket of consumer expenditures instead of a fixed-weighted basket in the CPI calculations. CPI is a CPIU is values or percentage as 1 year ago. Okay, so this is a chart that's on here. But what they're talking about is headline and core inflation, right? So when you have the 50-year average, core CPI is at 3.8%. Headline CPI is involving some of the food and the energy prices, right? So that when you look at that for 50-year average, its core CPI is 3.8%. April of last year, it's 3%. May of this year, May of 2021, is 3.8%. But food CPI is showing as a 50-year average at 3.9%, and April of 2.4 and May of 2021, 2.2%. And energy CPI, the 50-year average is 4.4. April of 2021, it's 25%. And of May of 2021 is 27%, right? So if you're building a long-term wealth plan and you're trying to put money aside, right, so that someday you can retire, and you're in this position where you need $100,000 or want $100,000 worth of income in retirement, and the number you're using 3% for the number, but it's really 4%. How wrong is your calculation? If we're, on a boat and we're going to head somewhere, and we think that the current in the wind is running at, 3 knots and the wind is, 10 miles an hour, and I'm heading into the wind and I'm heading into the current, well, I'm doing a calculation of how long I'm going to take to get there. If the wind's behind me and the current's ahead of me, it's a different calculation. I'm going to burn more or less fuel. There's things that I'm going to do, right? But when you really think through this for a second, right? So if I have $100,000 and I'm sitting here and I'm 45 years old and I'm looking out into the future and I've got a 3%, inflation, and I'm looking at 20 years from now, I need $180,000 in today's dollars to spend the same amount as $100,000 does today. But if inflation is actually 4, it's $219,000. So it's like $40,000, give or take, range of difference just for a 1 percentage point difference in those categories. When you start to think about the different items and different things that are going on, this inflation is what causes people to spend down money in retirement. Market volatility does, overspending does, all these other things, but this slow creeping of inflation is that everything costs more than it does in the future, than we thought it was going to, and that impact is going to, as you age, as you become older, you're going to spend money on different things. There's a wonderful chart that I put out also from JP Morgan where it's talking about the average annual spending by age and category. So you break it down, you got healthcare, education, housing, excluding mortgage, housing, mortgage, food and beverage, travel, transportation, entertainment, apparel, charitable contributions. And, as a wealth advisor, we sit here and, the number, top 5, one of the top 5 things that everybody always talks about is, I want to travel more when I retire. I want to travel. What the chart's showing is that 55 to 64-year-olds, it's about 4% of their budget, about 5% of their budget. Retirees, it's 4% of their budget. So it doesn't look like they're traveling more. It actually looks like they might be traveling less. But healthcare went from 9% of budget to 14%. Things that make you go, right? So it's when you start thinking about what it is that you're buying, how you're buying it, what you buy, where you buy it, when you buy it, you're impacted differently based upon, what it is that you're buying. And, you think about average inflation by spending category from 1982 to 2020, okay, based on the Consumer Price Index strategy. Healthcare over the last, over that time frame from 82 to 20, you're talking about 4.7%. Education is 4.6%. Now, I'm coming on the back end of, I've got 4 kids that have gone to, private high schools and public high schools and have gone to colleges, and I did not experience 4.6% inflation on those schools. I actually experienced significantly more than the 4.6 based on the schools that my kids went to and the expenses that were surrounding them, okay? Average inflation on a house, 1982 to 2020, is 2.7. Housing expenses, 2.8%. Food and beverage, 2.7%. Everybody that I'm talking to now has, leaving the grocery store with less stuff or much more money spent for the same stuff. Housing has gone through the roof. Real estate taxes are increasing. Insurance costs are increasing. If you live in a condo association, you're getting the impact of rising homeowners association dues, etc. If you're in Manhattan and you don't have the tenants in your co-op anymore that are paying, the commercial tenants, your co-op fees are going up. And you're seeing this, that's not really inflation, but that, you're seeing the impacts of rising expenses, right? So you have to be thinking about is what is this impact going to be on my wealth over time as I'm accumulating wealth. The longer I live, the longer I have wealth, the more impact inflation plays on that plan. If you go back to my calculation before, where we were talking about needing more money in the future, but if you take that $100,000 starting point and you think about a 30-year retirement that's going to be 3%, over the 30 years, $100,000 gets whittled down to 40 in purchasing power. So keeping pace with inflation is a very important thing, right? So when you think about it, what are the tools that we have available to us, right? What things can we do? And there's a lot of different concepts out there that, you can deploy in a financial strategy to impact and overcome the effects of inflation. And it's from that perspective, what you're really trying to look at is, if I retire on $100,000 and I'm living exactly the way I want to, I want to live that way over time. And as I move through different age brackets, my spending is going to change, but I want to have the benefit of that increasing income, so that my perspective is that I don't need as much money in the future. Most people that I talk to that are in their 80s and 90s, they need far more money than they needed when they retired. Far more. Everything is just more money. So when we think about it, the traditional strategy that you see is that if you have a lot of equities in retirement, that's going to be your inflation hedge. That hasn't played out for the generations that are currently retired in every case, right? You've gone through 50% downturns over the last 20 to 25 years here. You've had different types of interest rates. You've had housing prices going up, people leaving, moving, downsizing, but that's not necessarily the solution that works every time. So things that are really, really important is having different types of vehicles in the plan so that you have opportunities to do different things in your plan. Because it's a long time frame and you don't know what it's going to be, but the ultimate goal is that when you put a plan in play, you want to be thinking about growing as much wealth as you possibly can, reducing the tax burden on that. If I can reduce the tax burden, that's a way to increase inflation. Overcome inflation, right? If I can decrease the expenses on a plan, that's a way to help overcome, in the impact of inflation. If you can reduce the impact of, market volatility, that's going to be a way that's going to help you have more money to get through retirement. Having benefits and protection around that wealth, what you want to be doing is utilizing potentially reverse mortgages or charitable remainder trust to minimize taxation, get maximum income. Reverse mortgage can give you tax-free income. As we go into a rising tax environment, it might be really beneficial. Life insurance cash values can provide a tax-free but also a source of money for emergencies to go through that. The death benefit can be the permission slip to do reverse mortgage or to do a annuitization or to do a strategy. And you think about it, right, and this is really important. If I had $1 million 20 years ago, the interest rates were around 6.5% in the bank. So the $1 million could produce about $60,000 a year before tax. As I move forward, 20 years later, interest rates are 1% or lower. So that same $60,000 is now down to 10, but inflation has driven that need for spending up above that. So the retirees are forced to either take more risk to generate that more income or to spend down capital. And when you spend down the capital, the fear of running out of money becomes a greater and greater fear. Or reality, if you live longer than you expect, well, geez, you're going to run out of money if you're spending down that capital. And that's the biggest fear that a lot of people have is, between market volatility, inflation, taxes, transaction costs, fees, etc. Boom, I'm going to run out of money. Or the medical expenses and stuff like that. I don't mean to be so negative on this, but the reality is all of these things are conditions and strategies that have been present for forever. In my book, It's Your Wealth, Keep It, we talk about the impact of inflation a lot and how important strategy is in retirement to really push through that. It's not about the individual investment. It's about the proper mix of investments and strategies coming together in a unique way to overcome your unique obstacles that you have. So inflation is here. It's going to be here. It's going to be, like, if you think about, do you have a financial strategy that you're looking at, and what is it, how is it projecting how inflation is going to impact your expenses? And, is it, linear, meaning it's all across the board at 3%, or you have different impacts on different expenditures? Are you really understanding what you spend today? Because let's say you're 60 years old and you make $100,000 a year, and after taxes, you're spending $6,000 a month on stuff. And you're heading into retirement and you think somehow you're going to need $4,000 a month. But the reality is, what has changed? You don't have any income, but what has changed? Are you prepared to have that $6,000 a month strategy? And over time, are you prepared? Is your plan prepared to protect that $6,000 a month and the growth of it to keep pace with inflation? If it's not, we need to rethink it, right? So what as we do the podcast, one of the things that's really important is that people know that, we have what we call a wealth curve conversation. It's a free 30, 40-minute conversation with a financial advisor to talk about the financial pressure that you have and the potential things that you can do to overcome those objections and those strategies and those things that are giving you that pressure. And there's no fee, there's no obligation to actually do that. Most people feel it's one of the better conversations they've had, about their money going forward. But I offer this up to you. This is the amount of information that we have, as a society, the access to the internet, all the information. The most important part of a plan is building a team of advisors to support you and to surround you to make sure that, from a protection standpoint, you're protected properly. When you pass away, your family maintains their benefits to the maximum that they can, or has money to subsidize that. Nursing homes, long-term care, inflation, taxes, transaction costs, all this stuff is coming at you. And are you prepared for it? And this is one of the keys, is you want to spend a regular time looking at your plan to make sure that you have thought out the problems that could potentially show up. So good to talk to you today. Look forward to talking to you sometime in the future, and share the podcast with your favorite friends. Share the conversation. Come to the website, smallwoodwealth.com. The podcasts are there. There's many downloads. We have the 19 sources of retirement income for you, 8 steps to a successful wealth plan. The book is available for purchase on Amazon. It's called It's Your Wealth, Keep It. Look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.
Wealth Curve Talk with John L. Smallwood is brought to you by Smallwood Wealth Management, an investment advisor representative. Strategies mentioned may not be suitable for everyone, and the information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. Information has been obtained from sources that are deemed to be reliable, but their accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action, as information and/or opinions are subject to change without notice. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Past performance cannot be used as an indicator to determine future results. Smallwood Wealth Management provides content that is true and accurate as of the date of publishing. However, we give no assurance or warranty regarding the accuracy, timeliness, or applicability of any of the contents. We assume no responsibility for information contained on this website or podcast, and disclaim all liability in respect of such information, including, but not limited to, any liability for errors, inaccuracies, omissions, misleading, or defamatory statements. Thank you for listening.